Some decisions in celebrity families are louder because they are never announced. When Maddox Jolie Pitt quietly removed his father's last name, there was no statement, no explanation, no attempt to control the narrative. And that silence unsettled Hollywood more than any public feud ever could. Names in this industry are currency. They unlock doors, protect reputations, and create instant relevance. Walking away from one is not impulsive, it is calculated, it is final. And it forces a question no one wants to answer. What happened that made a son decide legacy was no longer worth carrying? From the outside, Maddox Jolie Pitt appeared to grow up inside one of the most powerful narratives Hollywood had ever created. A globally admired couple, a multicultural family presented as proof that fame, purpose, and love could coexist. As the first child, Maddox was placed at the center of that image early. He traveled the world, attended premieres, stood beside humanitarian missions, and was photographed as a symbol of unity and progress. But children do not grow up inside images, they grow up inside atmospheres. And atmospheres are shaped by tone, consistency, and emotional safety, not headlines. As the marriage between Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie began to strain, the family dynamic shifted in ways the public could not see. What was once presented as strength slowly turned into tension. Schedules became fragmented, travel became stressful, conversations became guarded. In high-profile families, conflict rarely explodes at once. It leaks, it lingers, and children notice long before adults admit anything is wrong. For Maddox, the pressure was layered. He was not just a child navigating divorce, he was a child doing it under surveillance. Every movement could become a photo, every absence could be interpreted. Privacy was conditional, not guaranteed. And when adults around you are managing public narratives while privately unraveling, trust becomes unstable. The family did not simply break apart, it fractured under observation. And for a child, being watched while your world destabilizes creates a unique form of emotional isolation. This is where the myth of privilege collapses. Access does not equal safety. Visibility does not equal support. Growing up inside a global image means learning early that appearances are protected, even when feelings are not. And when that environment becomes permanent, a child does not just grow older, he grows more guarded, more independent, and eventually more willing to detach from symbols that no longer represent security. There is always a moment when tension stops being abstract and becomes personal. For Maddox Jolie Pitt, that moment did not arrive as a single argument or a dramatic confrontation. It arrived as a realization, a shift in perception, the understanding that something fundamental had broken and would not quietly repair itself. Psychologically, this is the point where a child stops waiting for stability and starts preparing for survival. When conflict inside a family escalates into investigations, legal language, and prolonged uncertainty, children process it differently than adults. They are not listening for explanations, they are scanning for safety. Tone becomes more important than words, body language matters more than promises. And when authority figures appear unpredictable or emotionally volatile, trust erodes fast, not because of one incident, but because of the pattern it confirms. For an older child, especially one entering adolescence, this rupture often triggers an internal role shift. The child stops feeling protected and starts feeling responsible. Responsible for siblings, for emotional balance, for choosing sides even when no one says it out loud. Loyalty becomes a psychological burden. And once that burden is felt, attachment changes. Love becomes conditional. Distance feels necessary. What followed was not just physical separation, but emotional recalibration. Communication thinned, presence faded. Attempts at normalcy felt forced. And over time, silence replaced expectation. This is the stage where reconciliation becomes difficult, not because it is impossible, but because the cost of reopening wounds feels higher than the benefit of repair. In psychology, this is not rebellion, it is self-preservation. The public often looks for a single villain, a single moment to blame. But fractures like this rarely come from one event alone. They come from accumulated fear, unresolved tension, and the moment a child decides that emotional safety requires distance. By the time names are dropped and identities reshaped, the break has already happened internally, long before the world ever notices.
A last name is not just a word. It is a symbol of belonging, authority, and history. When Maddox Jolie Pitt chose to remove his father's surname, it was not an impulsive act. Psychologically, decisions like this happen only after a long internal negotiation. A name connects you to power, but it also binds you to memory. And when memory becomes emotionally unsafe, the mind looks for distance. In family psychology, rejecting a parent's name is one of the strongest forms of boundary setting, stronger than silence, stronger than absence. It is a way of saying that identity can no longer coexist with attachment. This does not require hatred, it requires clarity. For Maddox, the name Pitt represented more than lineage. It represented a chapter defined by instability, conflict, and emotional stress that he did not choose but was forced to carry. What makes this decision even heavier is the context of fame. The surname Brad Pitt is not neutral. It carries privilege, access, and cultural weight. Walking away from it means walking away from protection most people would never refuse, which tells us something critical. Emotional safety had become more valuable than social capital, and that is never a casual trade. At a psychological level, this act signals individuation. The moment a child stops defining themselves in relation to a parent and begins constructing identity independently. In healthy families, this process is gradual and supported. In fractured families, it is accelerated by pain. The name becomes the last visible thread connecting two lives that no longer function together. Cutting it is not revenge, it is closure. This is also why the decision was quiet. No interviews, no public explanation. Silence removes the possibility of debate. It prevents the story from being reframed by others. In elite environments, silence is control, and control is often reclaimed by those who once felt powerless. By the time a name is dropped, the emotional separation is already complete. The legal name change is just the paperwork catching up to a reality that has existed internally for years. What the public sees as shocking is, for the person involved, often the final step of a long and painful process of self-protection. What makes this decision more powerful is how it was executed. No public condemnation, no social media posts, no interviews designed to provoke sympathy, just paperwork, in private. That restraint signals something deeper. This was not a message meant for the public. It was a message meant for one person. And in families where power dynamics are unequal, silence is often the only leverage left. By removing the name without explanation, Maddox took control of a narrative that never belonged to him in the first place. This story is not about villains and heroes. It is about what happens when children grow up inside chaos they did not create. Healing does not always come from reconciliation. Sometimes it comes from distance, from redefining boundaries, from choosing peace over legacy. In Hollywood, walking away from a famous name is seen as ungrateful. In reality, it can be an act of survival. Maddox did not reject his father publicly. He rejected a version of family that no longer felt safe. And sometimes, the most honest ending is the one that happens quietly, without applause, and without ever looking back.